The story begins at the prestigious Royal School Academy, where the richest student in South Korea studies, along with the children of politicians, businessmen, and Korean nobility. Here we meet Yu, a girl who is at the bottom of the hierarchy but is the top student in her class. She works very hard to always be the best, even though to others she seems to have an arrogant attitude. Because of that, her classmates hate her, especially since she is the illegitimate daughter of the Sun family and lacks any status. She only has money. She thought that with her effort and talent, it would be enough to get everything she wanted. But everyone looks down on her for not being from a noble family. Even so, she didn't give up. She worked hard and managed to become a successful businesswoman. Since she made a lot of money and had become an important figure, she was invited to the birthday of the King of Korea. She used any event to attract attention. All her clothes were carefully chosen because they had to be bold and break the rules to set trends. You couldn't go to the king's birthday wearing red clothes since that color was only for the king. But Yu went in her red sports car and also wore a red suit. This made her stand out from the rest, and that's why all the clothes she wore sold out in her stores. She seemed to have the perfect life. But inside the palace, where there are no cameras, things were different. The nobility looked down on Yu because she was the illegitimate daughter of the Song family. Besides, neither she nor her family were nobility. They only had money but no status. This bothered her a lot because there was nothing she could do, since a noble title can't be bought. Her younger brother also arrives at the party. He was the family's heir. Yu hated him because she was better than him, and yet he would inherit their father's entire empire just because he was born first. In the next scene, we meet Grand Prince Ian. He had become the regent of the country since his older brother had passed away. But even so, he didn't seem to take his title very seriously, because he did whatever he wanted instead of what was expected of him. But the king was his nephew, so he couldn't punish him. After the celebration events ended, the prince moved away from everyone. Then the prime minister arrived and told him that for his own safety, he should always be accompanied. He tells him that he needed to reflect on his future, since his sister-in-law wants to marry him off as soon as possible, so he needs his help to prevent that from happening. Then, on his way to the Great Hall, he runs into Yu. She had gotten lost, and the Grand Prince tells her that a commoner cannot walk alone in the palace, so he will accompany her. But suddenly, a big explosion happens. The prince, frightened, runs to see if his nephew is all right, but the queen hits him and tells him it's his fault. It turns out that 3 years ago, the king died in a fire, and now it was happening again. Seeing this, Yu leaves the palace. His assistant tells him that he should have stayed to spend more time with his former classmates, since most of them went to the same school. But Yu tells him that he only has bad memories of the academy, especially a bad memory of the Grand Prince. When she wanted to practice her aim, she stole the key to the shooting range. But the prince showed up and told her it was forbidden. But it was only forbidden for her. Because she wasn't of noble birth, the boys from the royal family could practice without permission. Because of that, she held a grudge against him even after all these years. The next day, the queen apologizes to the prince for slapping him. She asks him to share his burden with her so that they can both be the regents of the country. But he tells her it's not necessary. Since the king is still a child, she should be his mother and not be in charge of the country's political matters. That's why the queen wanted to marry him off, so she could become the new regent and have all the power of the crown. For his part, Yu's father thought the same way. He wanted his daughter to get married as soon as possible so she would stop competing with his heir. But she didn't want to do it because she knew that meant giving up her father's inheritance. She was also sure they would marry her off to someone incompetent because no good family would accept her since she wasn't a legitimate daughter. That's why she decides to take the initiative and asks her assistant to find her candidates so she can get married. Despite her success and beauty, no good men are interested because the king must come from a good family. So the politicians choose the best candidate themselves. She asks her assistant to find someone for her to marry because she wants to get married. This way, she will not only earn money but also gain status. The status that always caused her problems will now work in her favor, and she will be able to become her father's heir. But getting an audience with the Grand Prince was very difficult. So no matter how hard she tries, she is always rejected. Desperate, she decides to use the nickname he gave her in school. That's how she manages to get an audience with him. They finally meet, and Huiyu doesn't beat around the bush and tells him she has an indecent proposal for him. She needs a husband and he needs a wife. They are both beautiful and have a lot of money, so they are the best option for each other. But the Grand Prince doesn't think the same way. He tells her that there are many other candidates who offer him the same and some even more. So she needs to improve her offer. Huiyu tells him that she won't cause him any trouble and that they will divorce in 3 years. Also, she will take all the blame so his reputation won't be tarnished. The prince tells her to offer something more. In the end, Huiyu doesn't know what else to offer, so she tells him that she'll give him whatever he asks for. The Grand Prince tells her that what he wants can't be bought. He needs love in order to get married. Because of that, Huiyu was upset because she thought he was making fun of her. Even so, she wasn't going to give up. As a businesswoman, she never accepts no for an answer, so she calls one of her directors and tells him that he must get her a contact in the royal family to get her the Grand Prince's entire schedule. With that information, Huiyu knows where and how to approach the prince. Even though he keeps rejecting her, she comes back the next day and starts flirting with him. And again, she proposes marriage to him. But he stays strong, and with each new attempt, he tells her no. Days later, Huiyu's family arranges some blind dates for her. She reluctantly agrees, but the guy they introduced her to, although he was very handsome, she didn't like him. He was too nice, the kind of man who only does what he's told. So she's clear with him, and asks him how much money his family needs to stop bothering her. This offends the guy, and he tells her that their marriage wouldn't work. Secretary Choi had seen them, so he went to tell the prince everything. He tells him that actually he was the one who rejected her, because apparently she has a very strong character. And he's sure they couldn't get along, much less fall in love. In the next scene, we see that the former king wanted to abdicate and give the throne to his younger brother. But the queen burned his last will, and she told him that she would rather see him dead than ruin her son's future. After that, the king died, and his son ascended to the throne. This tormented the Grand Prince a lot, because the crown was too heavy a burden for the child. That day, he had to present some awards, and since the prince was not nearby, the guards and the politicians approached the king to gain some power. Luckily, the prince appeared and told his nephew that he is not alone. At the beginning of the event, the prince holds the king's hand and leads him to the stage. Then he helps him present the awards. Huiyu was one of the winners, and she takes the opportunity to draw attention and to tell the prince that she misses him a lot. Then she plans to go on vacation for a few days. The prince on his part was feeling unwell, so he stays at a hotel, the same hotel where Huiyu was staying. Before reaching his room, he runs into Secretary Choi. He tells him what's going on. So worried, she calls his doctor, but the doctor tells her that he's just exhausted. In the next scene, we see that the queen mother was upset with her own son for not behaving like a true king, and instead, she called the Grand Prince to help him. That's why she wanted to confront him, because he was supposed to be on leave for a few days. That's how she manages to find out which hotel he was staying at. When Secretary Choi finds out, it was already too late because the queen had arrived. That's why he asks Huiyu to hide in the prince's room. The queen inspects the place and discovers Huiyu's bag. When she enters the room, she finds the two of them very close together. After that, a big scandal breaks out. The press leaked that the two were at the same hotel and that they had slept together. That caused a lot of rumors, and everyone thought they were dating, or something like that. The assistant was furious, but Huiyu was very happy, because that would raise the price of her shares, and it would force the prince to pay more attention to her. For his part, the prince asks to see Huiyu at his private residence. He wanted to apologize for tarnishing her honor and her image. She tells him that none of that matters, because as an illegitimate daughter, her honor was stained from the moment she was born. That's why she chose him to marry. He can give her something that can't be bought. That was a noble title. The prince tells her that's fine and agrees to marry her. But it won't be easy at all, and he hopes she's prepared for what's coming. Then the two of them announce their relationship to their staff. Huiyu manages to win the people's favor. Now, instead of criticizing her, they admire her, because a commoner won the heart of the Grand Prince. The queen was not happy at all with that news. That's why she tells the prince that he must clear up the rumors and issue an apology. But he tells her he'll do the opposite and announce their marriage. At the same time, Huiyu was with the king. Since he couldn't sleep, she had made him noodles. But this annoyed the prince, and he said that eating noodles was not proper for a king, so he sent him to bed. Yu asks him why he did that. He answers that if the food makes him sick, Hui Yu will be the only one responsible, and this could harm her marriage. Then they decide to sleep together, to make it look like their relationship is serious. But since it was the first time they shared a bed, they fought over the sheets and started making all kinds of noises. The ladies of the palace hear everything and think they're having a passionate night. The next day, Hui Yu goes to work in the same clothes and in the royal car. This was to attract more attention and get everyone talking about her. As a businesswoman, she tried to take advantage of every opportunity. Later, the Prime Minister goes to visit her. He asks her why she's getting married so quickly if she's just started dating the prince. She tells him she has to take advantage while the people are on her side. Besides, she needs his help so that the royal family and the politicians approve the engagement. In the next scene, we see that the queen fell ill to prevent the announcement of their engagement. At that moment, Hui Yu calls the prince to tell him that she spoke with the Prime Minister. But suddenly, some teenage girls attack her and throw eggs at her head. The prince thought she would be in trouble, but Hui Yu was tougher than them and put them all in their place in an instant. Later, we find out that the Prime Minister was in love with Hui Yu since he met her in school. He couldn't get her out of his head, but he never had the courage to tell her. And now he felt that he had lost all hope. Then Hui Yu's father goes to visit her and tells her that the anniversary of his wife's death is coming soon. Apparently, she died the day Hui Yu arrived at their home and introduced herself as her father's illegitimate daughter. Because of that, he was never able to forgive her. But what made him even angrier was that Hui Yu was ambitious. She was the one who resembled her father the most. She always wanted more, and she wasn't satisfied with being second. She wanted everything for herself, even what rightfully belonged to her older brother. That's why her father went to warn her to stay away from his businesses. Hui Yu tells him that she won't do it. She also warns him that everyone who has gone up against her has lost. So she won't make an exception for him just because he's her father. After her father leaves, Hui Yu remembers the story a little differently. At first, she wasn't ambitious. She just wanted her father to treat her the same as her older brother. That's why she worked hard to be the best at everything. But her father did nothing but belittle her. That's why she became obsessed with being the best, so she could crush everyone who looked down on her. And in the next scene, the prince himself goes to see her. He was worried about her safety, so he brought her food. And since she was attacked in her own building, he decides to take her to his private residence. There, she will have all the royal staff at her disposal. Then, since the Grand Prince had a lot of work, she decides to help him so he can finish sooner. But she didn't know anything about royalty. It was just an excuse to talk to him. She wanted to know why he agreed to marry her. The prince tells her that first of all, it's for her money. Secondly, for her beauty. And third, because if he said he wanted the throne, she would be the only one who would understand. Because she, just like the prince, is the second child, and she wants her father's throne. The next day, they start an audit against Hui Yu, supposedly because she is the main suspect in the palace fire. She was scared and didn't know what to do, so she asks her assistant to look for the prince, since he was at a ceremony where phones weren't allowed. But because she wasn't part of the royal family, they wouldn't let her in. Luckily, the butler arrived, and he brought the prince's emblem with him. That way, they managed to get through. Then the two of them looked for the prince. At the same time, Hui Yu was about to be interrogated. Luckily for her, the Grand Prince arrived just in time, and told them they couldn't investigate without his approval. Then, the queen appeared and said she had given the order. The prince defends his future wife and says that he was with her in the palace. And if they accuse her of something, they'll have to accuse him too. As the situation got tense, the assistant kicked her, and Hui Yu pretended to faint, to be able to escape from that awkward moment. Then she tells the prince that he's a great actor thanks to that little act. She's sure that word will spread about their relationship, and that he's madly in love with her. Just as she said, the whole palace was talking about what happened. Not only that, but they were exaggerating it. This really annoyed the queen. Then Hui Yu returns to the prince's residence, feeling like a winner, and to make the most of the moment, she decides to go to the palace to meet the prince through the wall. They knew there was a photographer nearby, so they pretend to be very much in love and fake a kiss. Although the prince didn't seem to be pretending. The next day, the pictures are all over the internet. Because of that, the politicians and the royal family They ask him to issue a statement to put an end to all those false rumors. But the Grand Prince tells them that it's not false, and that he really will marry her. The Queen and her father, they weren't happy with that decision. They had other plans for the prince, and they warned that it would be better for him to have an accident than to marry a commoner. Later, Hui Yu, she says that the news didn't get a good photo, and that their kiss didn't attract attention like she wanted. The prince, for his part, was willing to repeat the kiss, but she tells him no, unless there's a camera present. Then they agree to go out so people can see them in public, but the butler had dressed her up too well, and the prince tells her to take off that disguise and be herself. Then Hui Yu puts on more comfortable clothes, and they both go to a baseball game. By protocol, the prince can't support any team, so he can't wear the jersey. Then Hui Yu invites him to eat, but he can't eat either, because royalty has very strict rules about food. Suddenly, the Prime Minister arrives. He was supposed to throw the first pitch. Hui Yu gets very excited, and that makes the prince feel jealous. Then they appear on the kiss cam, but since he's such an important person, he can't do it. When the Prime Minister leaves the game, he invites Hui Yu to a restaurant. The prince gets jealous and says he'll go with them, but it's a sushi place, and the prince was forbidden to eat raw food. So he tells Hui Yu to enjoy it, because when they get married, she won't be able to eat it anymore either. Then Lady Choi scolds him for going to a baseball game, and for being seen at a sushi restaurant. So since his future wife is reckless, he decides to teach her royal protocols so she can behave properly. The prince didn't agree with that, but he couldn't say no to Lady Choi. Early the next day, he goes to look for Hui Yu. She tells him she's very busy, and that she'll see him another day when things are calmer. When she arrives at her company, her assistant tells her she has a very busy day. Since she was out with the prince, a lot of work piled up. In the next scene, Hui Yu's brother was very excited because soon his sister would rise to nobility, and that would make them rise as well. Also, the royal family is forbidden from running companies, so she wouldn't be able to compete for her father's corporation anymore. At night, Lady Choi, she had been waiting for Hui Yu all day. She was a very stubborn lady who always completed all her tasks. So she starts giving her an intensive course on how she should behave in the royal family. But Hui Yu was not the kind of person who lets herself be intimidated. She quickly manages to turn the situation around, and now she's the one teaching yoga to Lady Choi. She tells her that her muscles are very tense, and that those exercises would help her relax a bit. Then the prince arrives, and Hui Yu runs to hug him. She tells him that the classes were very tough, and that she needs a break. The prince listens to her, and takes Lady Choi to the palace. But the next day, she comes back to continue the classes. She explains to her about the funeral rites. Hui Yu takes the opportunity to start crying, saying that it was very sad for the Grand Prince to lose his whole family. She did that to be able to escape and not have to continue with the classes. Meanwhile, the Queen introduces a friend to the Grand Prince. She tells him that she would be a better candidate for a wife, since she is from the nobility and also has a lot of money. But the prince tells her not to worry, because he has already made his decision. In the next scene, we see that the children were very afraid of the king. Because of that, he couldn't have friends or act like a normal child. His only friends were the politicians who were always around him. For his part, Hui Yu continued with his intensive course with Lady Choi. Fortunately, at that moment the king arrived. Since he didn't have any friends, he asked to see his uncle to play for a while, but he wasn't home. Seeing him downcast, Yu told him they could play for a while to cheer him up. She grew up with commoners, so she knew many games that royalty didn't even know about. They spent a very fun afternoon together. The palace ladies, the butler, and even the prime minister played with the king. As night approached, everyone was very tired, and the king won the last game. So he asks Hui Yu to grant him a wish. The king wanted to ride in Hui Yu's sports car, since it was unique in the country. The king's lady tells him no, because it's not an authorized vehicle. Since Hui Yu didn't want to disappoint him, he asks the prime minister for permission, and he gives them authorization. Then Hui Yu drives the king around. He gets excited and asks him to speed up a little. Hui Yu listens to him, but when he tries to brake, the opposite happens, and the vehicle speeds up even more. Because of that, he goes over the speed limit, and the only thing he can do is swerve around the other vehicles to avoid crashing, since his car wouldn't stop. He decides to crash it into the guardrail, but this only slows it down a little. In the end, the prince found out and stands in front to stop the vehicle completely. Luckily, the king didn't suffer any serious injuries. Only the prince hurt his shoulder a little. The queen mother was furious. She thought everything was Hui Yu's fault. But the prime minister tells her that's not the case, that she's just another victim. Besides, it was the king who asked to get in the car, so it would be his fault, not Hui Yu's. When he wakes up, he goes to Hui Yu and apologizes for putting her life in danger. She tells him not to worry. The important thing is that everyone is okay. Then he goes to the prince to thank him and asks him never to do something so reckless again. The next day, the assistant was furious because with the news, her stocks had plummeted. But when he told her that someone had cut his brakes, she became very worried, especially out of fear that it might happen again. So she asks Hui Yu to give up the idea. At the idea of marrying the Grand Prince, they would end up divorcing anyway in 3 years. At that moment, the Prime Minister arrives, and he had heard everything. Because of that, Hui Yu tells him the truth. The Prime Minister, worried, tells her to forget about the prince and to marry him instead, since he also has a title. But Hui Yu rejects him because they are just friends. The prince overheard their conversation, and this made him feel really bad, so he kicked Hui Yu out of his private residence. Upset, she went to the palace to confront him. But the Grand Prince, instead of apologizing, he tells her that they should call off their engagement. But it wasn't because he was jealous. It was because he was afraid that next time they might actually hurt Hui Yu. He knows that if he marries her, she will become the target of many attacks. At night, Hui Yu's father asks to see her so she can explain what's going on. She tells him it wasn't an accident, but that her brakes were cut, and that she's investigating who did it. So she tells them that if they're not going to help her, then they shouldn't bother her. The prince felt really bad for Hui Yu, but he knew it was for her own good. That's why the next day, he sends her a very important invitation. An event where even the nobility must fight to earn their place. But Hui Yu rejects the invitation, because that would mean accepting that her engagement is over. The prince had managed to get her invited, on the condition that he would break up with her and marry another woman chosen by the royal family. At night, the prince tries to ask Hui Yu to attend the event, but she hangs up on all his calls. The next day, he invites her to the palace, and he explains to her that it's all to protect her. But she tells him that he's a coward, that if he really wanted to protect her, he would attack first and not be on the defensive like a coward. In the next scene, we see that Hui Yu's employees had identified the mechanic who last worked on her car. They also discovered that he used her brother's bank card, so she has to talk to him to help her find him. He says she must give him something first, but Hui Yu explains someone tried to kill her. Although the siblings dislike each other, they agree to help. Later, the prince calls Hui Yu. He tells her the official invitation has already been sent and refusing it will only harm her. The next day, Secretary Choi gives her lessons on royal etiquette. For example, he tells her that there is a hierarchy and that she should never walk in front of the nobility. Hui Yu didn't like that idea at all, but there was nothing she could do about it. On the day of the event, many noblewomen arrive wearing the clothes they were ordered to wear. But once again, Hui Yu decides to break the rules. She wears a different outfit and a color that wasn't allowed. On top of that, she is the last one to arrive, something that only the queen was supposed to do. This makes the others call her shameless. When they go for a walk, the queen notices that Hui Yu is too warm, so she decides to keep walking to bother her. But at that moment, the prince arrives and takes Hui Yu away so they can walk together. They even walk in front of everyone so she doesn't have to stay at the end of the line. This really annoys the nobles, but there's nothing they can do. Later, it was time for the royal ball. Hui Yu was once again the prince's fiancé, so she had to dress accordingly. When the evening began, the star couple was Hui Yu and the Grand Prince. They are the ones who start the royal ball. The queen thought that the prince was just saying goodbye to Hui Yu. But the prince had different plans. He would use that night to propose to her in front of everyone. He also invited his nephew to give them his blessing. Happy for his uncle, the king tells them he accepts their engagement and wishes them many blessings. This enrages the queen and also the prime minister. Both of them wanted to prevent the two from getting married. That's why the prince and Hui Yu go out to dance with them, trying to convince them. Because even if they don't like it, they need their approval. The prince doesn't beat around the bush and tells the queen that he knows his brother's last will. So if she doesn't approve their marriage, then he will make it public. The prime minister, for his part, was madly in love with Hui Yu, so he can't say no to her. Especially because their marriage was a sham, and they would divorce in 3 years. Then the future bride and groom have a moment alone. The prince tells her that when they divorce, she must return the ring because it's a national treasure, and it belonged to his late mother. Then they go to their assistant and find out that their engagement was very well received. Even Hui Yu's brother was happy. The next day, Lord Pion was furious with the queen for accepting that engagement. She tells him she had no other choice because the prince knows the late king's last will, so she accepted to protect her son's throne. Lord Pion tells her not to worry. If they can't have him as an ally, then he will be their enemy. As for Hui Yu's father, he was worried about his daughter's well-being, so he asks his daughter-in-law to get him an informant inside the palace, so he can protect her if anyone tries something. Then Hui Yu's brother goes to see her to inform her that he found the mechanic, but discovered that he was dead. But the strangest thing is that he had nothing, not even a family. This really upsets Hui Yu, because now she can't find out who sent him. Then she had an interview where she takes the opportunity to show off her ring and tells the whole country that they are the most in-love couple in the world. Since they are a couple again, the prince asks Hui Yu to return to his private residence so she can be safer. But this time they took more precautions. They discovered that the queen had a spy, and they had to keep her under surveillance so she would report only what suited them. Days later, they had to plan the wedding, since it was a royal event. The prime minister had to go with them. Hui Yu tells him there's no need to pretend, since the minister knows everything and supports him. They seem to get along. Well, the prince can't help but get jealous. That's why he complains to Hui Yu and tells him that he doesn't like his attitude, because he treats the prime minister better than him. But Hui Yu tells him that's obvious, because he's known him for many years and they're very good friends. Besides, they won't see each other again. After divorcing in 3 years, both of them get upset and say it's better to agree on all the terms in writing to avoid misunderstandings in the future. But while they're making their contract, the queen arrives, and she tells Hui Yu that he should stay for dinner. At night, Secretary Choi and the assistant are going to eat together. They were worried that those two might fall in love, but the assistant tells him not to worry. The prince isn't her type. Hui Yu likes trophy men, men without much value, who do exactly what they're told. In the next scene, we see that Hui Yu accepted the invitation to dinner. After drinking a little, the queen and Hui Yu, they talk as if they were best friends. The queen takes the opportunity to remind the prince that his name means to rule in peace. He was given that name, so that he wouldn't interfere with his brother's path or the next king. Hui Yu sees that this affects him, so she takes his hand and tells him it's time to leave. She asks the prince to hold on a little longer. When they get married, she will take care of getting rid of everyone who bothers him, so he can feel better. Hui Yu decides to take him to her yacht. Since he was royalty, it would be the first time he gets on one. Since they're at sea, she tells him he can eat whatever he wants. The prince listens to her and eats food he wasn't allowed to eat. Then they do the Titanic pose. And since the tide was high, they both fall onto the bed. And by accident, they kiss. Then they both let themselves go. And they kiss each other passionately many times. When they return home, both of them are very nervous and prefer to keep their distance, although they were so excited that they couldn't sleep all night. The next day, Hui Yu wants to leave without being noticed, but the prince catches her and tells her not to exaggerate. Then he goes to the church, and he tells the priest that the demon of love is inside his body and he wants him to exorcise it. The priest ignores him and shuts the door. When he leaves the church, he runs into the prime minister. The prime minister takes him to work since he saw him looking very happy. He reminds him that everything is fake and not to get too excited. Afterwards, the king has to set the wedding date. He wanted it to be as soon as possible, but the prince wanted a little more time. In the next scene, Yu goes to inspect a branch. There, her brother finds her. She tells him that he must maintain his profit margin. If it drops, she will fire him as president. That means she was going to leave her company to her brother. But that was a trap. She wanted him to take charge and make the revenue drop, so that the shareholders would fire him. And when she comes back in 3 years, she would be the rightful heir. Then the couple has to try on the clothes they will wear at their wedding. Hui Yu was very nervous, and she could barely look the prince in the eyes. Then, as was the custom, the groom had to send the dowry and ask his bride's father for her hand. But since he was the great prince, he could only send his secretary. Back to the couple. The prince wanted to discuss what happened on the yacht, but Hui Yu says there's nothing to discuss. They just got caught up in the moment and should forget it. The prince insists that's not true, saying they both must have felt the same. At night, Hui Yu couldn't sleep thinking about the prince's words. The next day, Hui Yu was very nervous because they had a dinner at her father's house. She was afraid of how her family would act. She felt very uncomfortable being at her father's house and pretending to be a happy family. Besides, her brother and sister-in-law were very sycophantic and adored the prince. Huiyu's father, for his part, asked her for just one thing: to value and take good care of his daughter. He never thought she would marry such an important person, and that's why he was worried. Yu tells him to stop pretending to be a concerned father because that's not like him. Then she gets up and goes to her room. The prince tries to comfort her, but she tells him she's fine and not to believe her father's act. The prince tells her that it doesn't matter whether he's pretending or not. They're going to get married anyway. She asks him if by any chance he has any feelings for her. Prince doesn't beat around the bush and tells her that he does like her. He also confesses that she was his first kiss. This makes Huiyu feel very special, and she doesn't know how to respond. The next day, the prince visits the prime minister to confess he has truly fallen for Huiyu, asking him to be mindful of his behavior toward her. The prime minister responds that this is not something he can decide. Days later, everything was ready for the big wedding. Huiyu's sister-in-law went in person to help her. Since she was from the nobility, she knew the protocols. But the prime minister and the queen were not happy with this union, so one of them had to do something. Then they performed the traditional Korean ceremony. Before reaching the altar, Huiyu stumbled since she was not used to wearing that outfit. After the ceremony, they have to do their grand traditional parade where the whole town can see the happy couple. Everyone was very happy. Everyone except the prime minister and the queen. When they arrive at the royal palace, they must present themselves to the king. But suddenly, Huiyu faints. No one understands what is happening, and the great prince, furious, makes a threat. If anyone dares to hurt his wife, he will not rest until he destroys them. When they take her to the doctor tells him that she was poisoned with a medication used for tachycardia. They gave her a lot, and that's why she fainted. But since she was healthy, her body was able to process it. Huiyu's father was furious and hits the prince in front of everyone. He tells him that he couldn't keep his daughter safe, not even for a single day. The prime minister was also furious and tells him that he must separate from her immediately. The prince tells him that he is right, but first he must investigate the palace to find the person responsible. He agrees, and thus a public investigation begins. They question everyone who was near Huiyu, even the royal family. Later, she wakes up. When the prince finds out, he runs to the hospital to see her, with tears in his eyes. He tells her that he couldn't bear to lose her, and says he doesn't understand why things are like this if she only fainted. Then the prime minister arrives, and they arrest him for questioning. The prime minister takes the opportunity to tell Huiyu everything that happened. She realizes that when she stumbled, she switched the cups. That means she wasn't the target. But the prince was, because he was taking that medicine, and that dose would have ended his life. Because of that, she wants to go look for the prince, but since she was still in a delicate state, the prime minister offers to go in her place. The prince already knew all of that, so he didn't plan to sit idly by. This time, he was going to strike back, but for that, he needed a fortress where Huiyu could be safe. The next day, Huiyu is discharged and her sister-in-law arrives to help her. She tells her that she looks too pretty, and to regain her popularity, she needs to look sick. So she puts on makeup, and when she goes out, she pretends to be weak. That makes people take her side. When she arrives at the palace, the queen welcomes her and tells her that she is now safe, and that they should support each other. Huiyu doesn't believe her at all. Then she goes to see the king. He was very worried about his new aunt, but she tells him that she's already fine. Then the prince takes his wife to her room. There, he tells her that he will fight to keep her safe, and he doesn't care about sacrificing his own life. Huiyu tells him not to be foolish, that they just got married and he can't leave her a widow. In the next scene, Lord Pyong visits the queen. He tells her about some things he did. They could cause a misunderstanding. At the same time, the prime minister discovers that the queen's spy had put the pills in the prince's drink. Meanwhile, Secretary Choi, he tells the assistant he's an orphan who grew up in the palace after his parents abandoned him. However, he doesn't resent them, as it allowed him to find a family, and he grew up in a place full of love. The next day, the secretary and the assistant switch places so that Yu can adapt to her new role as the prince's wife. That day, they had to award some scholarships at her old school, so she had to give the opening speech. Everything seemed to be going very well. But suddenly, some news shook the internet. Everyone knows about the contract that Huiyu and the Grand Prince signed. The one that says they're getting married for convenience and will divorce in 3 years. Since Huiyu was weak, she almost fainted. Luckily, the prince arrived and told her she could lean on him. Then, since a big scandal broke out, the secretary and the assistant went out together pretending to be the couple to distract all the journalists. The prime minister decides to help them, but first he asks if the contract is real. The couple says yes, so the prime minister assures them that it's better to keep quiet and let things calm down on their own. The prince assures them that the contract was a joke, but no one would believe that. Later, Hui Yu's private life is leaked. It is revealed that she is an illegitimate daughter and that she ended her stepmother's life. But Hui Yu doesn't care about those things because she was already used to people speaking badly about her. But she felt very sorry for the prince. In all this commotion, the royal family had gathered to solve it. But when the prince arrived, everyone fell silent. Although the queen tells him that since he dishonored his title, now he can't do anything except watch as the family solves all their problems. The next day, more articles are published discrediting Hui Yu. Because of that, many people gathered outside the palace to protest. This put a lot of pressure on the prince because he couldn't be a regent without the support of the people. That's why the prime minister asked him to resign. In the next scene, we find out that the prime minister already knew that the queen's spy was the one responsible for the attempt on the prince's life, and that Lord Pyong was behind it all. But he kept the truth to himself and went to the queen to tell her to clear things up with her father. When she confronted her father, he couldn't deny the fact, but instead of apologizing, he threatened her. He told her that if he falls, his entire lineage will fall with him, and that includes his grandson. Because of that, the queen has to cover for her father. And when the prime minister summons her, he offers her a deal. She knows that he is in love with Hui Yu, and she's sure he doesn't like seeing her with another man. That's why she tells him they should join forces to separate them. That way, he'll have a new chance to win her over. The prime minister lets his emotions get the best of him and accepts the queen's deal. That's why she didn't say anything to the prince. Besides, it was the prime minister who spread the marriage contract. The queen, for her part, does her part and talks to Hui Yu that he ruined the grand prince's reputation in exchange for a simple title and a bit of money. Hui Yu tells her that's not true, that the prince didn't ask her for anything. On the contrary, he offered her everything he had and was willing to separate in 3 years just to be her husband. Since they can't be separated, Ian asks the king to replace Prince Ian. The king, since he was a child, was afraid and didn't know what was happening. Luckily, the prince arrives, and he almost ended Lord Pyon's life for yelling at his nephew. Before a tragedy could happen, his wife arrives and asks him to let him live. Then the prince apologizes to his nephew and tells him that whenever he's afraid, he shouldn't hesitate to come to him. He also tells him not to let anyone else give him orders, or even raise their voice at him. At night, Hui Yu felt that he needed to help his man. That's why the next day, even though it hurt his pride, he calls his older brother. But he tells him that he should go see them at night because they had started auditing his companies. Because of this, Hui Yu was afraid, so he goes to his best friend to ask him what he should do. The prime minister is very tough and direct. He tells her that the best solution is to get a divorce. She rejects the proposal and tells him that she'll do anything except that. The prime minister tells her that it's a shame. After that, she goes home and kneels in front of her father. She asks for forgiveness for harming his businesses, but she needs his help. Her father is very tough with her, and he asks her who she wants to save, herself or the prince. His daughter answers that she wants to save the prince, because she can save herself. But her father tells her to get a divorce, that it's the easiest solution for both of them. Hui Yu goes to the prince and tells him that they should separate. That way, both of them would win. She would get her companies back, and he would regain his reputation. The prince tells her that would be the easy way out, and that's why he won't accept the divorce. Later, he goes to his late brother's room. There he remembers that the weight of the crown was too much for him, and the prince told him to act like a true king. His brother told him that he hoped he wouldn't end up like him, but now things are even worse. The next day, the prince tells Hui Yu that if she wants a divorce, then that's fine. So they go to the royal family council to get their divorce approved. But Hui Yu, to speed things up, she says that she is the one who is tarnishing the reputation of the grand prince and that they should take away her title, only hers. She also asks them to blame her for everything, since the prince has nothing to do with it. At the same time, Hui Yu's brother is about to make a statement, where for the first time he defends his sister. He said that the contract only benefits the prince. since his sister's company made a generous donation to the crown. Also, since she got married, she had to step down from running her company. And about the poisoning. He states that the entire palace is against his sister because she comes from a humble background. In addition, he says that he is responsible for the contract. He did it so that his sister would have some guarantee and not be left helpless. That press conference changed people's opinions. And because of that, the council was about to accept the divorce. But at that moment, the king's messenger appears. He tells him that his nephew has given up the throne to him. Lord Pion was furious because he had done everything to make his grandson become king, but his efforts had been in vain. Yu didn't understand what was happening. The prince tells her that this was the only way to protect them. When the queen found out, she was devastated, because it means that everything she sacrificed was for nothing. When she goes to look for her son, he was terrified. He barricaded himself in his room because he was very afraid of his mother. The furious queen orders her lady-in-waiting to force the door open. Luckily, the prime minister arrived and took her to her room. There, he tells her that the prince is not the king yet because the official order hasn't been sent. So now she has to convince the king to cancel that decree. For her part, Hui Yu was too anxious about the situation, and the prince didn't want to see her at the moment, supposedly because she didn't trust him and just wanted a divorce. This made Hui Yu feel really bad, and she tried to call him many times. Seeing her distress, Lady Choi tells her that the prince is in his private residence. So Hui Yu goes to look for him. When they meet, the prince tells her not to worry because he will sign the divorce papers. But Hui Yu confesses to him that she likes him and doesn't want to divorce him anymore. The prince tells her that he's confused, but she kisses him and clears up all his doubts. Then they have their honeymoon. The next day, the prince tells Hui Yu that he must return to the palace because he knows his nephew is in danger. Besides, he wants to become king to protect him, since his older brother. He wanted to pass the enormous burden onto him precisely to protect his son. He didn't want him to suffer the same fate. But before he could abdicate, he was assassinated. That's why at the beginning, the prince was also afraid. But with Hui Yu, he found the strength to move forward. Then the queen mother reproaches Prince Ian for manipulating the king. But he tells her that it was she and Lord Pyong who turned him into a puppet. That's why he will accept the throne to stand in front of the king and prevent them from continuing to use him for their own purposes. The queen tells him it's not fair, because she gave up everything for that throne, even the love she felt for Prince Ian. If she loses the throne, she will lose everything. The prince is not convinced and gives an order to her lady-in-waiting. No one is to disturb the queen for 3 days. At night, the queen calls her father to tell him what happened. Furious, he tells her that she must force her son not to abdicate, but the queen tells him that she is already tired. Besides, Prince Ian promised not to punish her for her brother's death. Lord Pyong tells her not to be foolish. Even so, his daughter doesn't want to listen to him anymore. Because of that, he says she leaves him no other choice but to eliminate the usurper. The official rise of the new king was near. Hui Yu and the others were very happy and proud of him. The king, for his part, was just a child and didn't want to be angry with his mother. But she tells him that if he doesn't revoke his order, he shouldn't look for her. But the little boy replies that this is what his father wanted. He knew the truth all along, but out of love for his mother, he decided to ignore it. Hearing these words, the queen breaks down, and for the first time, she sees her son, not his title. Afterwards, they both hug, and she asks him for forgiveness. At night, the prime minister summons the prince to the grand hall, but before he goes, the queen calls him urgently. Now she wanted to be his ally to avoid making her son suffer. But suddenly, the grand hall explodes. The prince was the only one there. So Hui Yu, desperate, enters the hall to look for him. She shouts his name as loudly as she can, but the prince can't respond. Luckily, she manages to find him, and with the help of Secretary Choi, they manage to get out alive. When the prime minister finds out that Hui Yu risked her life to save the prince, he yells at her and tells her that she should have let him die, and not exposes herself to so much danger. Hui Yu answers that he is her husband and that she loves him so much that she would even give her life for him. That answer breaks the prime minister's heart. The assistant, on her part, was very distressed because Secretary Choi risked his life to save the prince. But she was worried about the secretary, since she had fallen in love with him. Later, Hui Yu finds out that it was the prime minister who summoned the prince to the Great Hall. That makes her suspicious of him, but she can't accuse him without proof. So the next day, they go to check the security cameras. She also takes the opportunity to ask the Queen Mother for help. She was sure that the Queen Mother knew something. Later, the Prime Minister goes to see the prince. Hui Yu runs to prevent him from harming the prince and then acts normal so as not to raise suspicion. The next day, since the prince still hasn't woken up, the Prime Minister wanted to take advantage of the situation and take away Prince Ian's title to make things easier. Instead, they would make the Queen Mother the regent with the entire royal family on her side. It would be very simple, but at that moment, Prince Ian appears and tells them it won't be necessary. When Hui Yu finds out that her husband woke up, she runs to find him. He hugs her and apologizes for worrying her. In the next scene, we see that the Prime Minister was desperate, so he allied with the Orpion to get rid of the prince. That's why the next day, the person responsible for the fire turns himself in. But he was nothing more than a scapegoat. Later, the queen asks her father if he had anything to do with the fire. Lord Orpion doesn't know what to say, but his silence was the answer. The queen knows it was him, so tired of everything, she tells her spy that she won't be able to protect her anymore, but she promises to protect her family. Afterwards, she goes to Prince Ian and confesses all of her father's crimes. She also tells him that the Prime Minister knew everything and was conspiring with her father to overthrow him. That's why she asks him to give them an exemplary punishment, but she begs him to protect her son. Meanwhile, Fu Yu confronts the Prime Minister. When he sees that he is capable of lying while looking him in the eyes, he decides to show no mercy and promises to punish him. At night, Prince Ian was having doubts, because apparently the weight of the crown was too great. Everyone wanted to attack him, and he didn't know who to trust. The next day, the prince asks to speak with the Prime Minister. He asks him if he found out who poisoned him. The Prime Minister knows it's a test, so he tells him the truth and tells him not to worry. The prince orders him to give an exemplary punishment to Orpion, but the Prime Minister tells him no, because he is the Queen's father and the King's grandfather. With this, they confirm their suspicions, and he tells him that he no longer has to worry about the crown, because when he becomes king, he will abolish the monarchy. That way, the enormous weight of the crown will disappear and no one will have to bear it anymore. At night, they arrest Orpion. He knew he was finished, so he doesn't resist. The spy is also arrested and confesses everything. In the next scene, we see that the king was very happy, but his mother tells him that no matter what happens in the future, he must be strong, and that he should go to his uncle when he is afraid. The next day, the prince visits Orpion and tells him that history will remember him as just another common criminal. Then the Prime Minister tells the politicians. The prince's plans to abolish the crown. The politicians and the royal family were against it because the crown generates a lot of money. At the end of the meeting, Hui Yu arrives and tells him that since they have opposing ideas, it's inevitable that they will clash. Days later, the great coronation of the new king takes place. Immediately after being crowned, he decides to discuss the abolition of the monarchy. But the politicians make it clear to him that he is in a democratic country, so the one who should decide is the people. That's why they propose to call for elections. At the end of the meeting, the whole country was shocked because it was something that had never been seen before. Meanwhile, the queen goes to see her father. He asks her why she betrayed him. The queen answers that she felt ashamed in front of her son because he knew all her sins. And even so, he did what his mother told him to do. This makes Orpion feel ashamed as well. To try to redeem himself, he tells her that the Prime Minister knew about the explosion. In fact, he was the one who had planned it. When the Prime Minister came out, he was waiting for him. He told her that he would take her to the palace for her safety. On the way, he takes the opportunity to tell her that she has to oppose the idea of abolishing the crown, for her own good, and for her son's. Later, the Prime Minister freezes all the crown's money to put pressure on the king. But he didn't take into account that the king's wife was one of the richest women in the country, so she gives him double his annual budget. But the Prime Minister wouldn't just stand by, so he calls Hui Yu's father to testify about alleged illicit funds. Hui Yu's brother says he'll go instead, representing their father. After all, he's the heir. Yu agrees and promises to help him. Then her brother takes her to the palace, and she thanks him. She also calls him brother for the first time. This makes him very happy, and he can't help but smile. Hui Yu tells her husband what happened. She confesses that receiving help from her family feels strange to her, but she doesn't dislike it. On the contrary, now she feels safer because her family supports her. In the next scene, the queen was having doubts because the Prime Minister was unhinged. He wanted to protect the crown at any cost. even if he had to end the king's life. In the next scene, Hui Yu's brother is going to testify. Now he wanted to be a bit like his sister. That's why he decides to take off his jacket to get attention. At night, Hui Yu decides to go to the queen. He tells her to take his side so she can protect her son. Because if something happens to the king, her son will be the one to bear the weight of the crown again. The next day, it must be decided whether the people will vote or not for the abolition of the monarchy. The prime minister is strongly opposed, so Hui Yu has to intervene. He tells the prime minister that he knows everything now, that it was him who tried to end King Ian's life, and that he conspired with Lord Pion to preserve the crown. The queen had recorded their last conversation, so that was all the evidence they needed. Since Hui Yu was the one who exposed him, the prime minister couldn't even look him in the face. This makes everyone turn against the prime minister, so he no longer has any power. Before they arrest him, the king asks him why he did it if the crown disappears. Even he would benefit. The prime minister tells him it was because of him, because he stole the woman he loved. The king tells him that's not true, because she was never his. Days later, the elections are held. The whole country had to choose whether to abolish the monarchy. Hui Yu asks her husband what he would like to do if the monarchy is abolished. He answers that he would like to be called by his name. They've always used his title. Then at the bus stop, the secretary wants to approach the assistant, but she steps forward and kisses him. Then, Lady Choi sees them kissing, and she asks the driver to give them privacy. Days later, the people chose to abolish the monarchy. Now, the enormous weight of the crown would no longer crush anyone. As they left the palace, Yu calls her husband by his name. It turns out his name was Li Wan. Months later, Hui Yu went back to running her company and started attracting attention again as always. But her brother had left her a lot of work. Plus, he came with the news that he was going to be a father. That's why now, he wants to take a few years off and leave her company in her sister's hands. Li Wan on his part was resting, but Secretary Choi was bothered by how slow he was. And he didn't know how to do the house chores. That's why he asked him to go back to work instead. In the next scene, Hui Yu's father tells his daughter that he never wanted to belittle her. He just wanted her to stop fighting with everyone. Now that she understands, she can compete to become his heir. As for Lady Choi, she had a lot of affection for the former king. That's why she gave him a bed, so he could sleep better and produce heirs. Much later, Hui Yu arrives, and her husband was waiting for her. He wanted to spend time with her because now she's much busier. But after showering, Hui Yu was so tired that she couldn't talk and fell asleep. The next day, Li Wan and her sister-in-law, they go to buy a gift for their nephew. She wanted him to be a musician and to spend time with his friends, like a normal child. Later, Li Wan wanted to propose marriage to her wife again, because their previous meeting doesn't count since the crown was abolished. But she heard everything and tells her that it's not necessary. Their love is more than enough. He didn't agree, because he wanted to marry her so he wouldn't be left helpless. Hui Yu gets angry because she thinks that she fell in love before he did, but Li Wan answers that it's not like that he fell in love with her when they were in school, when he saw her for the first time. He never confessed his feelings because he thought they would meet again later. But since he wasn't from the nobility, that never happened until they saw each other at the palace many years later. That was the main reason why she accepted his marriage proposal, even though at that moment she didn't feel the same way. Afterwards, they share a reconciliation kiss. In the final scene, the prince goes to the museum to tell his brother that he fulfilled his last wish. Afterwards, Hui Yu, Li Wan, Secretary Choi, and the assistant finally get to go to a baseball game and kiss in front of the camera. That's how this story ends. I hope you liked the summary. I heard many people dislike the ending, but I don't get why since I thought it was decent. What do you think? I'll read your comments. There was also talk about a possible spin-off telling the story of the Queen Mother and her love for Prince Ian, and how she gave all that up to marry the king. But I think it will be in digital novel format. Thank you very much for making it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next summary. See you in the next story.